It's that time again. Welcome back to Between the Verses. She's Maya.
And he's Josh. Thanks so much for being here with us again. We appreciate you tuning in.
Absolutely. And we've been really encouraged lately. We've had a few messages, a couple of shout outs on social media. Nothing huge, but enough to remind us that these conversations are actually reaching some people.
Which feels really good, because this whole thing started as just two people sitting down, opening the Bible, and asking questions out loud.
Mostly awkward questions, not knowing where they'd land. And that's still what this is, and we're glad you're here with us.
You bet. And today we're asking a question that I think a lot of people are actually afraid to ask out loud.
And that question is this: is it okay to question God?
And just to be clear, we're not talking about doubting whether God exists. This is something different. It's about what happens when you believe, but you don't understand.
Right. When something in your life or in the world just doesn't make sense. Or when something feels, deeply unfair. To who, what, and how do we turn in those moments?
So, let's get to it. I think a lot of people, us included, grew up with this idea that questioning God is dangerous. It's a big no-no.
Oh, absolutely. It's almost an unspoken rule, isn't it? That it means you're being disrespectful.
Or ungrateful. Or rebellious. That you're somehow stepping out of line.
Yeah, but when you actually study the Bible, that whole idea, it doesn't really hold up.
Not at all. Because questioning God happens all over Scripture. And what's really striking is that it's often done by the people who are held up as examples, people described as being deeply faithful.
There's one moment that always comes back to me when I think about this. The story of Abraham. Abraham arguing with God over the city of Sodom. Abraham is usually remembered as this steady, obedient figure, the man who leaves his home because God tells him to, who trusts promises that seem impossible. But there's this moment later on in the story of Sodom where we see a very different side of him.
God tells him that the city is going to be judged, that it's become so violent and unjust that something has to change. And Abraham doesn't just accept that quietly. He doesn't just wonder if God is doing the right thing. He speaks up. He basically says, hold on a second, would you really destroy the righteous along with the wicked?
And then he keeps going. It's not just one question. He questions the numbers. He negotiates. He pushes back again and again. It feels, it's incredibly bold.
He's haggling. He's haggling with God over human lives. And what's so striking to me is that God doesn't shut him down.
Right. There's no anger from God, no punishment for his audacity. It's just a conversation, an actual back and forth.
It's such a strange scene when you slow down and really sit with it.
It really is. And it really changed how I see faith. Because Abraham clearly trusts God. That's not in doubt. He just isn't willing to stay silent when something feels wrong to him.
It makes questioning feel less like rebellion and more like relationship. It's as if Abraham cares enough about justice and about other people to speak honestly. And God allows that honesty. In fact, he engages with it.
Yeah, he does. I think a lot of us have moments, maybe not on the scale of arguing about a whole city, but moments where we believe in God, but we struggle with what's happening around us. Or with decisions that just don't make sense, with suffering that feels completely unnecessary.
And in those times, sometimes questioning God sounds like asking for clarity. Other times, it sounds more like frustration. And sometimes, let's be honest, it sounds like anger.
Yeah, I remember a time in my own life where I just kept thinking, this isn't how I imagined things will turn out. I wasn't doubting God's existence, but I was questioning why certain doors stayed closed, why all this effort didn't seem to matter.
Why prayers felt just unanswered. The silence can be deafening sometimes.
And I didn't want to admit those thoughts out loud. I was worried that saying them would somehow, damage my faith. But keeping them inside just made me feel more distant too, more isolated.
So what helped?
What helped was realizing that the Bible already contains those kinds of questions. They're not edited out. They're not softened for the reader. And I wasn't alone, I guess.
Which brings us to another moment in the Bible. one that feels very different from Abraham's, and much harder, I think.
Much harder. It's Jesus on the cross quoting a psalm and asking, "Why have you forsaken me?"
And that question, that doesn't come from confidence the way Abraham's did. It comes from pain, from abandonment, from silence and confusion.
And what's incredible is that the question is just allowed to stand. It's just left there. It hangs in the air. There's no immediate answer, no correction.
Just the question itself. And it means that this raw, painful kind of questioning isn't something that happens on the edge of faith. It happens right at the center of it.
And it's so important that Jesus doesn't stop trusting God in that moment. He continues speaking to God, even when God feels completely absent.
I think that speaks to so much of the modern experience of faith. There are times when people pray and they feel nothing. It feels like they're talking into silence, into thin air.
Yeah, they show up, but they don't feel reassured. Faith feels quiet rather than comforting.
And that can be quite unsettling because we're always told that faith is supposed to feel warm or encouraging. And when it doesn't, well, we assume something must be wrong or that we're doing something wrong.
But the Gospels show us that faith isn't always about feeling close to God. It's about not leaving the conversation with God, even when the words echo back unanswered.
Absolutely. Questioning God in those moments isn't about walking away. It's about staying in the conversation, even if it feels incredibly one-sided, staying honest, staying present, even when you don't feel held.
For me, that's a huge relief. It means I didn't have to pretend. It meant I could bring my disappointment into prayer, my confusion, even my frustration.
The Bible doesn't suggest that God is threatened by our questions. If anything, it seems to suggest that God invites them.
Because questions mean we're still engaged, still listening, still speaking. And maybe that kind of faith, the faith that keeps speaking into the quiet, is just as real, if not more so, than the faith that always feels so certain.
If you think about it, questioning God only really becomes a problem when we stop talking altogether. When we withdraw and decide that silence is somehow safer than honesty.
So you have these two incredible moments. Abraham questions God boldly. Jesus questions God painfully. And both moments are shown in Scripture. Both are treated seriously, and neither is condemned.
And that tells us that there isn't just one right tone for prayer. There isn't one acceptable way to speak to God.
Exactly. Sometimes prayer sounds calm and peaceful. Sometimes it's messy.
Sometimes it's a protest. Other times, a cry.
So if you're listening to this and you've ever felt guilty for asking hard questions, it might help to know you're not doing something new.
You're stepping into a long and faithful tradition.
Questioning God doesn't mean you lack faith. So often it means you actually care enough to stay present, to wrestle, to keep going.
Yeah, walking away is easy. Staying the course, being honest, is harder, but so much more rewarding in the long run. As we come to the end of this conversation, maybe there are a few things worth taking with you. First, it is totally okay to question God when things don't make sense.
It's okay to speak honestly, even when the words feel uncomfortable. Faith doesn't require you to be silent and reserved.
It doesn't require pretending or having everything resolved.
Sometimes faith just looks like continuing to speak, even when you don't hear an answer yet, even when the question remains.
Another thing to remember is that speaking honestly to God is not a failure of trust. It can actually be an expression of it, because you're choosing to bring your confusion into the relationship rather than carrying it alone.
Just staying present with God, your questions, with yourself, is already an act of true faith.
Exactly. And that's where I think we'll leave it for today. Thank you for listening and for taking the time to sit with these questions alongside us.
Next time, we'll be back with another short conversation, another passage, another small question that can feel pretty big at certain times in your life.
Until then, be gentle with yourselves, and we'll see you next time on Between the Verses.